She was serving coffee until her billionaire boss whispered, "Pretend you love me, now." Everyone in that boardroom wore a $1,000 suit. She wore a black apron, stained with coffee. No one knew her name. But when the billionaire leaned in front of them all, and whispered, "Pretend you love me now," Grace realized this wasn't about coffee anymore. It was about power, reputation, and something dangerously close to love. Before we continue, if you enjoy touching and inspiring stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Now, let's get back to the story. Pretend you love me now. His voice was low, calm, measured, but Grace felt it like a lightning strike, right through her ribs. Her hand froze mid-pour, coffee streaming dangerously close to the edge of the porcelain cup. She blinked twice, stunned. Had he really just said that? A murmur of impatience stirred from the boardroom. The CFO shifted in his seat. Someone tapped a pen, sharp and deliberate. Grace? Adrian Blackwell's gaze didn't waver. His tone didn't rise, but the steel blue of his eyes pinned her in place like a secret only they shared. She lowered the carafe. "Is there a problem?" the company lawyer asked, half smiling, half snide. He was already annoyed she was in the room at all. The coffee girl among executives. Grace straightened, gave a small nod, and stepped back from the table, trying to ignore the heat in her face, the sudden sweat along her spine. This wasn't just another meeting. This was their quarterly report. High stakes. Investors watching. One wrong move, one fumble, and the media would be feeding on Blackwell's empire by sunset. And Adrian Blackwell, poised, unreadable, had just asked her to pretend to love him. She wanted to laugh. Or run. Or ask what kind of game he thought he was playing. But she did none of those things. Instead, she returned to her spot by the wall, folded her hands and listened, heart hammering, while the men talked millions. Grace Bennett hadn't planned on staying long at Blackwell & Co. Her temp agency had placed her here for 2 weeks, filing, answering calls, brewing the endless coffee. No one remembered her name except Adrian. He always said it right, quiet, respectful, almost curious. Once, when she'd left her necklace in the break room by mistake, he'd found it before anyone else, returned it without a word, but with something unreadable in his eyes. Now he wanted her to play a part, in a room full of people who didn't know her, didn't see her. But he did, and that was the problem. The meeting dragged for another 42 minutes. Grace knew because she counted. Her heart didn't stop galloping the entire time. She tried not to look at him. Failed. Every few minutes, Adrian would glance toward her with that same unreadable calm. She started building 100 theories in her head. Was there someone watching? Was he trying to avoid a scandal? Was it some twisted test? When the final slide clicked off and the room buzzed with half-hearted claps, Adrian stood. "Thank you, everyone. That'll be all for today." The suits began to shift, gathering their files, talking in low tones. Then his voice again. Deeper now. "Grace." A moment. A few eyebrows lifted. A few glances darted her way, but no one said anything. She followed him into his office like a moth after a flame. The glass door shut behind them with a hushed click. He didn't turn to face her right away, just walked to the window, hands in his pockets, the skyline laid out before him like a chessboard he'd already mastered. "Sorry about earlier," he said finally. "I didn't have time to explain." Grace crossed her arms tightly. "So you thought whispering, 'Pretend you love me' in the middle of a meeting was the best option?" A pause, then a chuckle. Quiet, honest. She wasn't expecting it. "I admit," he said, "it was poorly phrased. No, it was completely insane." Another pause, then softer. "It was necessary." He turned now, looked at her fully. "There's a story running about me, the tabloids. You know the kind. Cold billionaire, ruthless heartbreaker, incapable of love. Isn't that Your brand? She said, half under her breath. He smirked. Barely. Unfortunately, it's damaging now. The board's nervous, investors too. I'm acquiring a company with family values. They don't want a corporate shark. They want someone human. And I'm supposed to be your proof? He nodded once. No apology in his face, but no arrogance either. You're kind, well-liked by the staff. You represent something they trust. And more importantly, he added, you're not chasing anything. That makes this feel real. She wanted to argue, but part of her understood it wasn't flattering, but it was honest. Still, her arms didn't drop. Her spine didn't relax. What do you want from me exactly? Just presents, he said. 1 or 2 appearances. A dinner, a few photos. All tasteful. No interviews. No lies. You'll be compensated, she frowned. And when it's over, it ends, cleanly, quietly. You get a reference if you want it, a generous one. She studied him now, this man who could buy buildings, crush competitors, fire half the floor without blinking. And here he was, asking her for a favor. A temporary illusion. But illusions have power. And this one would put her in a position she'd never dreamed of. Not for money, not for exposure, but for dignity, for being seen. Still, she hesitated. Then her fingers brushed the chain around her neck, the tiny silver pendant, cool and steady. Her mother's voice whispered somewhere behind her ribs. Choose your moments carefully, Gracie. Some come only once. She looked back at him. I have one condition. He raised an eyebrow. Go on. I'm not going to act like someone I'm not. No giggling, no clinging, no fake fireworks. If I do this, I do it with dignity. Adrian's expression didn't change. But something in his shoulders shifted, something almost like respect. Deal. That night, as she closed up the kitchenette and turned off the espresso machine, Grace caught her reflection in the steel. Hair tousled, cheeks still pink from the afternoon heat. It was starting. Whatever this was, a farce, a favor, a mistake, it had begun. And something deep inside her already knew nothing would ever be quite the same again. Because tomorrow they'd be seen together in public for the first time. A quiet lunch, nothing extravagant, but one photo. One photo would be all it took. And by the time it made the rounds online, the headline wouldn't be about Grace at all. It would be about what was hiding in the background. Grace had never sat across from a man like Adrian Blackwell in broad daylight, in public, with people watching. She wasn't even sure what to do with her hands. The cafe he'd chosen was tucked away, brick walls, climbing ivy, old Parisian chairs that clinked when you shifted, the kind of place people came to escape from being seen. So why did it feel like the entire city was watching? Don't look so tense, Adrian said without looking up from the menu. You're just having lunch. You're not, Grace muttered. He glanced up at her now. What's that supposed to mean? You're conducting damage control. She smiled politely. I'm just the collateral. For a split second, something softened in his eyes. Then the waiter arrived, notebook in hand, and Adrian returned to form. I'll have the seared trout with lemon rice, he said. Grace ordered the same. It was the only thing on the menu she could pronounce without stumbling. The waiter smiled, a little too wide, and walked off with a glance that lingered a beat too long. Grace looked away. Adrian noticed. Is something wrong? No, not at all. She picked up her glass of water and nearly spilled it. Just thinking how surreal this is. He leaned back, studying her. You're not used to attention. I work in a supply closet and serve espresso to accountants, she said dryly. No, Adrian, I'm not used to attention. And then, for the first time since the meeting yesterday, he laughed. It was short. Low, real. Grace blinked. That was funny, he said, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve. You should do that more often. What, talk back to billionaires? Exactly. The food came, fragrant, simple, beautiful. Grace cut into the fish slowly, trying not to stain her blouse. Adrian ate like someone who'd been trained to do it efficiently. Grace stole glances when he wasn't looking. How he held his fork, how he didn't check his phone once. "So, are we being watched?" she asked softly, finally giving voice to the tension in her shoulders. He nodded. "Yes. Table near the door, one near the kitchen, and a man pretending to read a newspaper behind you." "Charming. You'll get used to it." She wasn't so sure. Adrian set down his fork and reached into his blazer, pulling out a pair of dark sunglasses. "Put these on." She raised an eyebrow. "Seriously?" "Smile, laugh, look like you're in love." Grace froze. Then she let out a breath, shook her head slightly, and did what he asked. It was strange. Pretending. Stranger still how natural it started to feel. She smiled. He smiled back. And, for one flickering second, no one was pretending. A phone shutter clicked. Another. The man with the newspaper subtly turned a page. And just like that, she thought it was done. The moment, the photo, the story. By 4:20 p.m. The picture was already online. Her phone buzzed with a message from her sister. "Is this you? What on earth is going on?" Attached, a headline that made her stomach twist. "Cold CEO melts. Adrian Blackwell spotted laughing with mystery woman. Romance or PR stunt?" She clicked the link. There they were. Grace and Adrian, framed in soft cafe light. She was mid-laugh, necklace catching the sun. He was leaning in, tie loosened just a little more than usual. But that wasn't what made her drop the phone. It was what was behind them. Slightly blurred but clear enough, seated just over Adrian's shoulder, was a woman in a cobalt blue dress. Watching them. Watching her. And Grace knew that face. Not personally, but well enough. Vivian Locke. The daughter of the Blackwell family's most ruthless business rival, and Adrian's ex-fiancé. She was there, Grace asked as soon as she stepped into Adrian's office later that evening. Her apron still hung from her waist. Coffee stains faint near the hem. He didn't look up from his desk. "She's always there," he said flatly. Grace closed the door gently behind her. "You knew she'd be at that cafe?" "I suspected." "And you didn't think to mention that?" He finally looked at her, tired, calculating, but with a flicker of something else underneath. Guilt, maybe. "I needed to see how far she'd go." Grace crossed her arms. "So I was a decoy." "You were a shield?" he corrected. "You don't know Vivian?" "No," she said, voice tightening. "But I do know when someone's being used." There was a beat of silence, long enough to hurt. Then Adrian stood and walked around the desk and met her eyes. "You weren't supposed to see her." "But I did." "She's trying to rattle me. She wants me to react, to make a move she can twist. I needed you there, so I wouldn't give her the satisfaction." "So this isn't about photos," Grace said quietly. "This is about her." Adrian didn't respond. Not in words, but his silence answered everything. That night, Grace sat on her apartment floor with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, scrolling through the photo again. Everyone was looking at the couple in the foreground. No one was talking about the woman behind them, but Grace saw her. And the way Vivian looked at her, it wasn't curiosity, it was possession, like she was watching something that used to belong to her. And Grace couldn't shake the chill that came with that stare. She reached up and touched her necklace, the one her mother had given her after her divorce, years before cancer took her away. "Wear it when you forget who you are," her mother used to say. "It'll remind you." Grace had a sinking feeling she was going to need that reminder more than ever. Grace didn't return to Adrian's office the next morning. She went straight to her usual corner near the kitchenette, tied her apron, and kept her head down. No glances, no questions, just coffee, the way she'd always done it. Her hands didn't shake, but they felt too tight, like her skin was a size too small. By noon, she'd brewed 2 gallons of espresso, restocked the sugar canisters, and rearranged the mugs twice. Anything to avoid thinking about that picture. or Vivian's stare, or the sharp twist of humiliation that came when she realized she'd just been a move in someone else's game. Again. She was wiping down the counter when Ethan, the intern from HR, appeared, awkward and red in the face. Miss Bennett, Mr. Blackwell asked to see you. Now," she kept wiping. "Grace," he added. "He, said, please." Now that was new. She walked into his office without knocking. He was pacing. That surprised her. He didn't pace. Adrian Blackwell was the kind of man who waited, still, composed, always in control. Seeing him unsettled almost made her feel guilty. Almost. "I owe you an apology," he said, stopping mid-step. Grace crossed her arms. "For using me?" "For blindsiding you." He held her gaze. "That wasn't part of the deal." She said nothing. He stepped closer, then thought better of it, stopping a few feet away. "I didn't know Vivian would show up," he continued. "But when I saw her, I made a choice. I let her see you. I let her assume more than she should." Grace tilted her head. "Why?" There was a long silence. Then he answered, quietly and without armor. "Because I wanted her to see I'm not hers to rattle anymore." The honesty in his voice startled her. Not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. It was quiet, real. She looked away. "You still should have told me," she said. "I know." She looked back at him. "Not angry now, just tired. You want someone to play a part, but you keep forgetting. I'm not an actress." Adrian let out a slow breath and ran a hand through his hair, a rare, unguarded gesture. "I never meant for you to matter," he said. Grace's breath caught. It wasn't cruel. It was heartbreaking, and maybe the truest thing he'd ever said. That evening, just before closing, she found a paper bag on the kitchenette counter, still warm. Her name was scribbled across the top in firm handwriting. Inside, a gourmet grilled cheese sandwich and a small tomato bisque, still steaming. Next to it, a handwritten note. "I remembered you skipped lunch. A." She stared at the note for a long time. She didn't eat right away, just sat at the tiny table by the window, watching the city lights flicker on. Half an hour later, she heard the glass door slide open. Adrian stepped in, no tie, jacket slung over one shoulder. "You left work 2 hours ago," she said. "I forgot something," he said simply. She gestured to the sandwich. "You forgot your guilt, or your dinner?" He smiled, faint, but it was there. "I figured you'd be here late." Grace motioned to the opposite chair. He hesitated, then sat, and for a moment they ate in silence. A quiet meal in a quiet room. Not a meeting, not a stunt, just two people with too much on their minds. "This is actually really good," she murmured, surprised. He raised an eyebrow. "You sound shocked." "I assumed you'd eat sad little salads and power shakes." He chuckled. "That's only for board meetings and magazine interviews. When no one's watching, I'm a grilled cheese man." She smiled, for real this time. "Don't let that get out. You'll ruin your brand." Just then, a knock sounded at the glass door. It slid open, and in stumbled a food delivery guy awkwardly holding 2 drinks and a bag of something greasy. Is this Blackwell & Co.?" he asked, breathless. "Some guy ordered milkshakes and fries." Adrian blinked. The guy looked at Grace. "You?" Grace looked at Adrian. Adrian was fighting a smile. "Could have sworn I canceled that," he muttered, pulling out his phone. "Guess you didn't," Grace said, already grinning. Adrian handed the man a bill. "Keep the change." As the door slid shut behind him, Grace laughed. Full, genuine, for the first time in days. "You have no idea how much this ruins your Ice King image?" Adrian opened the bag, pulled out a strawberry milkshake and slid it across to her. "Then let's ruin it properly." Much later, long after the fries were gone and the laughter had faded into silence, Grace touched her necklace absent-mindedly. "You know," she said softly, My mom used to say that dignity isn't about looking important. It's about knowing you're not small. Adrian didn't respond right away, just watched her, carefully. "That's why you wear it?" he asked. She nodded. "She gave it to me the year my father left. Told me to wear it whenever I forgot who I was." He looked like he wanted to say something, but instead he stood. "Grace," he said, his voice lower now, more cautious, "if this is too much, if you want to walk away—" She shook her head. "I'm already in it. I might as well see where it leads." Their eyes met, and for once there was no game between them, no camera, no Vivian, just a man, a woman, and something fragile beginning to take root. But outside that quiet moment, something else had already begun to stir, because in a different office, in a very different part of the city, a high-profile lawyer had just received an envelope. Inside, a series of photos, Grace, Adrian, the cafe, and a copy of her personnel file. Grace had barely stepped through the office doors when the mood hit her. The energy was different, quieter, watchful, whispers, glances that darted and vanished, a few polite smiles. Too polite. She knew that feeling. She'd lived it before. Not seen, not mocked. Worse. Talked about. She walked straight to the back room and untied her coat slowly, trying to stay calm. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she was imagining it. But then Naomi from accounting, who had always been sweet, always offered her gum, passed without a word, without even looking at her. Grace's chest tightened. Something had shifted. She just didn't know what. Yet. Adrian wasn't in his office. His assistant, Lyle, looked up over his tablet with a faintly apologetic wince. "He's downstairs, conference room 5. He said you should wait in here." Did he say why? No. A pause. But he seemed off this morning. Didn't sleep, I think. Grace stepped into Adrian's office and closed the door quietly. The room was spotless, impersonal. Even the air felt carefully filtered. But on the glass table by the window, someone had left a file, thick, crisp, sealed with a black binder clip. Her name, Grace Bennett, was printed on the front. She stared at it. Her hand hovered for a second. Then she picked it up and opened it, and felt the floor drop out from under her. Inside were records, pages of information, most of it outdated, some of it painfully accurate, her college transcript, a copy of her employment history, even the year she'd taken off to care for her mother, letters from a previous job, one flagged as termination with cause. She had resigned, but clearly someone had twisted that version. And worse, a photo of her from the cafe, laughing, the necklace glinting under sunlight, cropped tightly. Someone had gone through a lot of effort to make this file, and to make her look like a liability. Grace's stomach turned. "Who sent this?" The voice startled her. She turned sharply. Adrian stood at the door, tie undone, jaw tight. His eyes flicked from the file in her hands to her face, and for the first time since she met him, he looked almost unsure. She held up the file. "You tell me." He walked forward slowly and took it from her hands, flipped through the pages, then swore under his breath. "I got it this morning," he said. "Anonymous envelope, no note, no return address." "And you didn't think to tell me?" "I didn't want to upset you until I knew what was in it." "Well," she said bitterly, "surprise." He sat down, flipping through the pages again, expression darkening. "Some of this is inaccurate, and the way it's arranged, they're framing you." Grace crossed her arms. Heart pounding. "Why?" "Because if you're seen as unstable or dishonest, it makes me look like a reckless fool. It discredits both of us." He rubbed his eyes, then stood and moved toward the small cabinet in the corner. "Sit," he said. "What?" He opened the cabinet and pulled out a paper bag, 2 breakfast sandwiches, and a pair of coffee cups. "Sit," he repeated, gentler this time. "Eat something before we both lose our minds." Grace sat, mostly because she didn't know what else to do. He handed her a sandwich, still warm, and coffee, black with 1 sugar, just the way she took it. She hated how comforting that was. "Do you recognize the file?" she asked. "I recognize the formatting," he said. "It's old Blackwell HR protocol from when my father ran things, someone from his era." "That narrows it down to, what? Dozens of people?" He didn't answer. She took a bite, just to keep her hands busy. They ate in silence for a moment, quiet chewing and distant traffic filling the space. Then Adrian said, without looking at her, "I know what this is." Grace waited. "It's Vivian." Her stomach twisted. "She can't control me anymore, but she can control perception. And you're easy to target. You're new, unconnected, and no one thinks twice about hurting the assistant." Grace didn't speak. Didn't move. She just stared at the folder, the tidy rows of text, the calculated cruelty. He set his sandwich down. "This ends today." "How?" she asked. Adrian leaned forward. "Tonight is the investor dinner. It's going to be public. Press everywhere. I want you there." Grace stared at him. "You want me to show up in front of cameras after someone tried to assassinate my character with a personnel file?" He nodded. "They tried to humiliate you in secret, so we'll answer in the open, with dignity." She hesitated. Then she asked, not bitter, not dramatic, just honest, "Am I still just a shield to you?" There was a long pause. Then, softly, "Not anymore." She left the office with her pulse roaring in her ears. Part of her wanted to quit, walk out, and never look back. But she thought of her mother, her necklace, the feeling she'd had last night, eating milkshakes with a man who wasn't as cold as he wanted the world to believe. Something was changing, in her, in him, and in the shadows of this polished world. Someone was still watching. Because in a dark corner of a private members club, Vivian Locke set down her phone and smiled faintly at the photo on her screen. Grace in Adrian's office, eating breakfast. How quaint. She slid the phone into her purse and glanced across the table at the woman seated opposite her. Elegant, older, wearing a silk scarf and a cool, distant smile. "Let me guess," Vivian said, lifting her champagne glass. "You still think your son is too clever to fall in love?" The woman sipped slowly. "He won't. Not with her." Vivian clinked her glass with hers. "To mothers who raise kings, and to the girls who think they can touch the crown." "You don't have to be perfect," Adrian said as the car pulled into the hotel's private driveway. Grace swallowed hard, staring out the tinted window at the sparkling lights of the gala entrance. She could already see the camera flashes beyond the ropes. It looked like something out of a movie, a sea of gowns and suits, champagne flutes glittering under chandeliers. "I don't need to be perfect," she said softly. "I just need to survive." Adrian turned his head slightly. She wore a navy blue satin dress, nothing flashy, but elegant, timeless. Her hair was softly pinned, a few strands falling the way they always did, naturally framing her face. But it was the necklace, that delicate silver pendant, that made him stop for just a second longer than necessary. "You look—" He hesitated, searching for a word he didn't often use. "Real." She met his eyes. "Let's hope that's enough." The ballroom was a forest of golds and silvers, clinking glassware, murmured deals, polite laughter wrapped in strategy. Grace followed a half-step behind Adrian, feeling like a spotlight was stitched to her spine. This wasn't her world, but tonight she was expected to pretend it was. "Just smile like you mean it," Adrian whispered from the corner of his mouth. "That's the whole game." She smiled. It felt paper-thin, but it worked. Within minutes, they were approached by a polished couple in their late 60s. Donors, Grace assumed. Adrian greeted them warmly with his trademark restraint, then gently introduced Grace. "And this is Grace Bennett," he said simply, offering no labels, no assistant, no girlfriend, just her name. As if that was enough. The older woman appraised her with polite curiosity. "You have such a calm presence. That's rare in this circle. Grace smiled again. I make coffee for a living. Calm is part of the job. The woman laughed, genuinely, and for a brief, flickering moment, Grace felt herself exhale. Dinner was served at a long, crescent-shaped table, crystal glasses, silver cutlery, bites so small and expensive she was afraid to chew. Grace sat to Adrian's left. Across from them sat the CFO, his wife, and 2 board members. At first, the conversation was easy. Market projections, holiday bonuses, rumors about a competitor going under. Then someone shifted the tone. So, said a silver-haired man across the table, Adrian, is this a personal partnership or a professional one? He didn't smirk. He didn't blink, but the question landed with a thud. Grace's spine stiffened. Adrian didn't hesitate. He placed his wineglass down gently, turned slightly toward Grace, and answered evenly. Grace is the most honest person I've met in years, so I suppose it's a personal partnership that started professionally. There was a soft murmur of amusement. A few raised brows, but something in his voice, quiet, anchored, kept anyone from pressing further. Grace, though, nearly forgot to breathe. He didn't say it for the table. He said it for her. The courses passed. Laughter ebbed and flowed. Toasts were made. At one point, a waiter nearly spilled sparkling water on Adrian's tailored lap, and Grace bit back a laugh when he flinched and muttered something under his breath that no CEO should say in public. She leaned toward him, grinning. Still think this is a good idea? He gave her a sidelong glance. Remind me to triple that waiter's tip. It was a small moment. Ridiculous. Fleeting, but it broke something heavy between them. He smiled, really smiled. And Grace didn't pretend this time. She laughed, not loud, not theatrical, but quietly, naturally, in a way that didn't beg attention but somehow captured it anyway. That's when the photographer passed. Click. One flash. One shot. The smile, the necklace. The way his hand had shifted subtly toward hers on the table. Later, just as dessert was being served, Adrian leaned toward her again. I'm going to have to give a short speech, he said under his breath. Standard nonsense, I'll be quick. Don't worry, she said. I'll look properly impressed. He stood, adjusted his cufflinks, and walked toward the podium. Grace watched him, tall, steady, unreadable, and suddenly felt something stir in her chest she hadn't expected. Not butterflies, not longing. Recognition, not of him, but of herself, who she was around him. Not invisible, not underestimated, seen. Adrian spoke with practiced grace. He thanked the investors, thanked the team, promised strength, vision, and growth. But at the end, his voice softened. Some people think companies are built on strategy and market timing, he said. But what I've learned is that the most important decisions I've ever made were emotional ones. He looked down at the table, at her. And for just a breath the room disappeared. Then it was back. Applause, toasts, music. Grace blinked and reached for her water, but her fingers brushed something else, a folded napkin, one corner tucked under her plate. She opened it under the table, just 2 words, written in clean, sharp ink. Thank you. The ride home was quiet. The city blurred past the window in soft yellow streaks. Adrian didn't speak, neither did she. Until he finally asked, gently, Did tonight feel like pretending? Grace looked over at him. His tie was loosened, his voice low. The question wasn't about the crowd. No, she said, and then, without thinking, Did it feel that way to you? He didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. She stepped out of the car with her heels in one hand and her heart in her throat. He didn't follow her, but he watched her walk to her door, waited until she was inside. Safe, all right. Before the car pulled away, she leaned against the closed door, necklace resting against her chest, heartbeat racing. And for once, she didn't feel borrowed. She felt like the story was finally hers to tell. until she saw it. An envelope, propped on her kitchen table, no postage, no name. Just 3 words written in red ink. He's lying again. The note sat between her fingers, thin and weightless, but it felt like a stone in her chest. He's lying again. 3 words, that was all. No signature, no explanation, just left inside her apartment like a whisper slipped under her skin. Grace had triple-locked her door the night before. She was sure of it. She always checked twice. Had someone broken in, or had someone she knew found a way in? She didn't sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table until sunrise, the city slowly lighting up behind her, trying to decide if she was paranoid or just finally paying attention. And when her alarm buzzed, she was already dressed. At 7:42 a.m., Grace walked into the office kitchenette and started a fresh pot of coffee, though she didn't drink any. She sliced 2 pieces of bread, toasted them, and pulled a tiny jar of raspberry jam from the fridge. Routine, safe, grounding. Adrian appeared in the doorway 15 minutes later. "Early," he said, stepping inside. "So are you." "Couldn't sleep." Grace spread the jam slowly. "Me neither." He leaned against the counter, watching her. "You okay?" he asked. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and realized he'd already read her body language. He could see something was wrong. And for the first time, he seemed ready to ask. But she wasn't ready to answer. Not yet. "Toast?" she offered, handing him a plate. He took it carefully. "Thanks." They sat at the small round table, knees nearly touching, eating in a silence that wasn't entirely peaceful. Grace broke it first. "Oh, I found something last night, in my apartment." Adrian looked up instantly. "What do you mean?" "An envelope. No return address, just a note." His brow furrowed. "What did it say?" She hesitated, then met his eyes. "He's lying again." He stared at her for a long beat. Then, "That could be anyone." "Could it?" "Vivian's known for psychological games. This fits her pattern." Grace tilted her head. "But you didn't seem surprised." He blinked. "Because I've seen this before. With her." "And you're sure it's her?" Grace pressed. "Not someone else in your world with a reason to warn me?" He hesitated. That pause was all it took. Something in her face shifted. "Adrian, what haven't you told me?" He exhaled, pushed his plate aside. "I've protected a lot of people and kept a lot of things off the record. That's part of running a company like this." "I'm not asking for your boardroom secrets," she said gently. "I'm asking for truth. About you. About why I'm really in the middle of this." He looked tired, not in the physical sense, but in the soul-deep way people look when they've been guarding something too long. Finally, he said, "Vivian and I weren't just engaged. Our families were tied together by a merger. An old money alliance that went deeper than either of us realized when we were younger." Grace leaned in. "She left you?" "No." His voice turned colder. "She used me, then blamed me when it fell apart. The tabloids were a disaster. My mother sided with her. The board nearly forced me out." Grace's brows rose. "Your mother sided with Vivian?" "She thinks women like Vivian belong in this world, Grace." He paused. "She doesn't think you do." The toast in Grace's stomach turned to stone. "So that's why she was at that lunch. That's why she keeps appearing." "She's not finished with me," Adrian said, "or with this story." Grace looked down at her necklace. Her fingers found it instinctively. "Why didn't you tell me all of this sooner?" "Because I didn't think you'd still be here?" She looked up, their eyes locked. "I didn't think I'd care if you left," he added. "But I do." The truth landed between them, raw, quiet, and deeply human. Grace sat back, heart thudding. "I want to believe you," she said softly, "but if I find out you're lying, I won't stay." "I'm not lying," he said. "Not to you." She reached into her bag and pulled out the envelope she'd brought with her that morning, the same one from her apartment. She'd slipped it inside before leaving. unsure why she couldn't just throw it away. He reached across the table and took it from her gently, then pulled something else from his coat pocket she wasn't expecting, the red envelope. He laid it on the table between them. "I had your building security pull the hallway footage." Grace's breath caught. "Oh, I thought it would be Vivian, but it wasn't." "Who was it?" He hesitated, and that hesitation was different this time. Not shame, not guilt, fear. "I don't know yet," he said, "but whoever it is, they had a key." That afternoon, Grace requested to work on a different floor, just for the day. Adrian didn't stop her. She spent the next few hours in the logistics department, labeling boxes and reviewing supply lists, far away from penthouse politics. It felt good. But her phone buzzed just before 6:00 p.m. Ubarks, new message from unknown number photo, attached text. "Still think he's different?" Her breath caught as she opened the image. It was grainy, slightly pixelated, but unmistakable. Adrian at a restaurant, the same night as the investor gala, standing near a woman in a dark coat, smiling, leaning in. Vivian. Grace's blood went cold. The timestamp read 11:17 p.m., less than an hour after he'd walked her to her door. Yomra. Ors. Grace didn't sleep. Not even for 5 minutes. She lay in bed with her phone on her chest. The grainy image burned into her mind. Adrian standing next to Vivian, too close, too familiar, his smile too unreadable. And the timestamp didn't lie. 11:17 p.m., less than an hour after he had walked Grace to her door. After he had stood in front of her like a man saying goodbye to something he wasn't ready to lose. What had he done after that? Driven straight to her? Grace sat up slowly. It wasn't just the image. It was the feeling underneath it, the dull ache of being second, not chosen, not trusted. Again. She walked barefoot to the bathroom, cold tiles against skin, quiet air pressing in around her like a question. Then she reached for her necklace. Her fingers hesitated at the clasp. It had sat there for years, a small, steady weight. Her mother's voice lived in it. Wear it when you forget who you are. And tonight, she had. She unhooked it, laid it gently on the bathroom counter, and stared at her reflection, eyes puffy. Skin pale, truth spreading like a bruise beneath her collarbone. By morning, the ache hadn't faded. At 7:30 a.m., she sat at her tiny kitchen table, with toast and tea she didn't touch. No makeup, no coat. No plans to leave. She didn't call the office, didn't text Adrian. She just paused. The silence was its own kind of healing. But also a reckoning, because the woman in the cafe photo, smiling, glowing, had started to believe this might be more than a role. And the woman now? She didn't want to make that mistake again. Her phone buzzed. "Adrian, where are you?" She typed 3 words, simple and honest. "Taking the day." His response came quickly. "Are you okay?" She stared at the screen, then locked it. She didn't know if she was okay, and she wasn't going to pretend this time. By noon, she found herself wandering through the small farmers' market on Rose Street, where the vendors sold overpriced strawberries and handmade soap that all smelled like eucalyptus. She didn't want anything, just the movement, the people, the anonymity. She stopped at a booth selling jars of jam, touching the lids absently. "Grace?" She turned. Mrs. Linley, her upstairs neighbor, stood there in her usual oversized cardigan, holding a sunflower and staring like she already had a headline ready. "I thought that was you," she said, lips pursed. "Saw your picture in the paper yesterday. You and that billionaire of yours looked like you'd won the lottery." Grace smiled tightly. "It's complicated." Mrs. Linley waved a hand. "Of course it is. You're young. He's rich. These things always are." Grace blinked. "I'm not that young." The older woman leaned in with a smirk. "Still young enough to let men break your heart and call it growth." That made Grace laugh, unexpectedly. The sound surprised her. It was small, but it was hers. Mrs. Linley handed her the sunflower. "You want some advice?" I think you're going to give it either way. True. She lowered her voice. If a man lies with his mouth, that's bad. But if he lies with his eyes, that's heartbreak. And the worst part? You can't prove it. You just feel it. Grace's smile faded, because she had looked into Adrian's eyes, and that night, the night he'd walked her home, she'd believed him. He hadn't lied with his eyes. And yet, why was he with Vivian? Across the city, Adrian stood in his office, still dressed from the day before. Shirt sleeves rolled up, eyes bloodshot, coffee cold on his desk. Lyle entered without knocking. She hasn't come in, he said. Adrian nodded, jaw tight. I know. She hasn't answered your texts either. I know. Lyle hesitated. Should I reschedule today's board strategy call? Push it. Sir, can I speak freely? Adrian looked up. You've built a wall around yourself so high, no one even tries to climb it anymore, but maybe she was never trying to climb. Maybe she just knocked. Adrian said nothing. Lyle cleared his throat and added, You're not afraid of being wrong. You're afraid of being seen, and I think she saw you. Adrian didn't respond, but when he walked out of the office 10 minutes later, he wasn't carrying a briefcase. He was holding an envelope. Grace was folding laundry when the knock came. 3 quick taps. She froze. Opened the door. Adrian stood there wearing a soft gray sweater instead of his usual armor. No tie, no suit, just a man with dark circles under his eyes and something in his hand. I didn't come to explain away your feelings, he said quietly. I came to give you the truth. He handed her a manila envelope. She didn't take it right away. What is it? Footage from the restaurant, the night of the gala. Vivian called me there. I didn't tell you because I didn't want her to ruin what we were building. Grace's jaw tensed. So you decided for both of us. I made the wrong call. Her arms folded. You could have told me. I can handle hard things, Adrian. I just can't handle lies. I didn't lie, he said, but I didn't trust you with the whole truth, and I regret it. She looked at the envelope, then at him. His eyes, for once, held no defense. Do you love her? She asked, quiet but steady. No, he said without pause. But she loves the part of me I used to be, and she's not done with it yet. Grace finally took the envelope. I need time, he nodded. I'll give you all you need. She stepped back, didn't close the door immediately, but didn't invite him in either. He lingered just a second, then turned and walked away. And when she closed the door, she didn't cry. She breathed, deep, clear, and alone. That night, she brewed tea and turned on the old laptop she only used for writing resumes. She slid the flash drive in and opened the video. And there it was. Adrian, standing, tense. Vivian, poised, calculated, sliding something across the table. It was her file, the same one he'd received weeks ago. Vivian leaned in, said something that the audio couldn't catch. And Adrian stood up, took the file, didn't touch her, didn't smile, didn't stay. He walked out. Grace exhaled, then saw the note tucked at the bottom of the envelope. Just 5 words. You deserve the truth. Yeah. She closed the laptop. No tears, no dramatic music, just a shift, quiet and meaningful, in the air around her. And across town, Vivian locked eyes with her driver through the rear-view mirror. Plan B, she said, pulling on her gloves. Are you sure? She smiled thinly. Oh, yes, let's see how honest Grace is when I give her the chance to lie. Grace had never been summoned before, not the way this message came. Handwritten, delivered in person by the doorman of her apartment building at exactly 10:01 a.m. A single line on ivory cardstock, let's stop pretending. 11:30 a.m. Rosebridge Hotel Lounge, come alone. V, no threats, no drama, just certainty. Grace stared at the card for a full minute before setting it down. The lounge wasn't far, and somehow Vivian knew she wouldn't ignore it. Because Vivian didn't attack directly, she invited, and that was more dangerous. Was At 11:27 a.m., Grace stepped into the Rosebridge lobby. Polished marble, jazz piano, crystal light drifting from a chandelier so grand it felt like overcompensation. She wore simple black slacks, a fitted blouse, and no makeup, not out of defiance, but because she refused to dress for war. Vivian was already waiting. Of course. She sat at a corner table by the tall windows, wearing a cream silk blouse and impossibly red lipstick. The kind of beauty that always knew it was being watched, and counted on it. Grace approached slowly. Vivian didn't stand. "Miss Bennet," she said without a trace of warmth, "you're punctual." "I'll give you that." Grace sat down. "You said no pretending. So, let's not." Vivian smiled, a slow, measured expression that never reached her eyes. "I'm not here to scare you," she said, folding her manicured hands neatly. "I don't need to." Grace tilted her head. "Then what do you need?" Vivian picked up her espresso. Sipped delicately, then, "I want to help you." Grace blinked once. "Help? You're being pulled into something you don't understand. You think Adrian is choosing you, but he's using you." Grace didn't flinch. "He's told me more than you think." "Has he told you about the family vote, the clause in his late father's will that activates if Adrian's seen as emotionally unstable?" Grace stayed silent. Vivian continued slowly. "If the board believes he's compromised, if they think he's being manipulated by someone beneath his station, they can remove him, strip him of the seat, the fortune." Grace leaned forward. "And you're so selfless. You thought I should know." Vivian's smile sharpened. "No. I'm selfish, but not stupid." She pulled a folded envelope from her clutch and slid it across the table. Grace didn't touch it. "Inside," Vivian said, "is an offer, not hush money, a proper job. In Milan, fashion firm, entry level but fast track, apartment, visa, no interviews." Grace's stomach turned. "You want me to disappear?" "I want you to choose something that doesn't involve getting dragged down with Adrian when the house collapses." "You think he'll fall?" Vivian's tone turned almost sad. "I know he will." For a long moment neither woman moved. Then Grace reached up and touched her bare collarbone. "No necklace today." She looked Vivian in the eye. "I used to think women like you had all the power." Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Don't we?" "No," Grace said quietly. "You just speak louder. But women like me, we outlast." Vivian said nothing. Grace stood. "I won't take your job, and I won't run." She pushed the envelope back across the table. Then added, just before turning away, "By the way, the necklace you always smirk at, it was my mother's, and every time I wear it, I remember she taught me how to recognize poison, even when it's offered with espresso." Vivian blinked, but Grace was already gone. By the time she returned to her apartment, the adrenaline had worn off and the shaking had begun. She didn't cry, but her hands trembled as she filled the kettle and pulled out a can of soup from the cupboard. Something warm, simple, familiar. When the knock came 20 minutes later, she didn't move at first. Then she opened the door. Adrian stood there, holding a brown paper bag. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "I know. I saw her." His eyes darkened. "What did she say?" "She offered me Milan." His jaw clenched. "Did you take it?" Grace shook her head. "I told her I'd rather face the storm than run from it." He exhaled slowly. "I brought dinner," he said after a beat. "Didn't know what you'd feel like eating." She stepped aside. He entered quietly. She served the soup. He brought out 2 bread rolls from the bag, still warm. And they ate at the kitchen table in silence for a few minutes, like old friends too tired to pretend. Then she asked, "Is it true? About the will?" Adrian paused, then nodded. "Yes. My father built in a clause to protect the company from my mother, but it cuts both ways. If I fall in love with someone the board considers unstable or unvetted, they can move against me." Grace didn't look up. And Vivian knows that. She's betting on it. Are you? He looked at her. Slowly. Intently. No. Grace set down her spoon. I need to know something before this goes any further. Ask. Was I ever just a strategy? He didn't answer right away. Then softly. Yes. At first. She nodded once quietly. But not any more, he added. And it scares me more than losing my name. Or my company? She met his eyes. There was no performance in them now, no calculation. Just a man who finally knew what it felt like to want something real. And maybe not deserve it. Grace stood, walked to the bathroom. When she came back, the necklace was around her neck again. She sat down and whispered, "Then don't lie again." "I won't." "Good," she said, taking another bite of soup. "Because next time I won't cook for you." He chuckled softly. And in that moment something shifted. Not a kiss, not a confession, just a quiet, undeniable truth. They were in this, for real, but outside her window, across the street, someone lowered a camera lens and smiled. The morning after Vivian's offer, everything felt still. Too still. Grace woke early. She hadn't meant to. But her body had learned to rise before the rest of the city. Even in chaos, her hands moved with routine, coffee, toast, water for the plants. She thought Adrian would text. He didn't. And somehow, that felt right. No pushing, no chasing, just breathing space. She sat at her kitchen table, necklace warm against her skin again, sipping black coffee and letting herself feel, fully, without pressure to explain it to anyone. But at 8:12 a.m., there was a knock. She opened the door to find Adrian, no suit, no driver, just a man holding 2 takeout cups in a paper bag. "I brought backup," he said, "in case your coffee's better than mine." Grace blinked, then smiled, just a little. "Mine is better." Thought so. She stepped aside. They sat by the window. Steam rising between them, he pulled 2 muffins from the bag. "Blueberry and banana walnut." "Peace offering," he said. "You're 2 chapters late for peace offerings." "Then maybe this is a prologue." She laughed once, not loudly but honestly. He watched her for a moment, not speaking, just seeing her. "You seem lighter today," he said. "I made a decision." "About Milan?" "About me." He nodded slowly, then asked, "And what did you decide?" "That I'm not going to let people like Vivian write my ending for me." His gaze softened. "I never wanted you in the line of fire." "I know, but I stepped into it with my eyes open." A beat. Then she added gently, "You don't have to protect me, Adrian. You just have to stand next to me." He nodded again, slower this time. "I can do that." Then, silence. The good kind. The kind that comes after honesty has settled and nothing else needs to be said. But it didn't last, because her phone buzzed. Loud, sharp, 3 times in a row. She picked it up. 3 messages. Lyle, urgent. "Grace, are you with Adrian?" Lyle, second. "We have a situation. Someone leaked internal files, including yours." Lyle, third. "Check the news, now." Grace's hand trembled as she unlocked the screen. Adrian leaned in, instantly reading her expression. "What is it?" She didn't speak. She turned the phone toward him. There it was. Breaking. Blackwell & Co. are rocked by internal leak. CEO accused of manipulating public image with hired companion. Underneath, a photo of her. And not just one. The cafe, the gala, the office. All cropped to look like something scandalous, calculated, deceptive. It painted her as a planted figure, a paid romantic decoy, hired to soften Adrian's public image for the board. The headline had claws, but the comment section had teeth. Grace's heart pounded as she stood. Adrian was already on his phone. Calling Lyle, she grabbed her bag, breath shallow. "Grace, wait. Did you know this was coming?" "No," he said sharply. "But I know who would benefit from it." "Vivian?" He nodded once. and possibly someone inside. Someone gave them access. Someone let them in. 20 minutes later, they were in Adrian's office, Lyle pacing. 3 phones ringing on the desk, emails flooding in. "She beat us to it," Lyle muttered. "And the timing, right before the Q4 board vote. This wasn't just sabotage, it was warfare." Grace stood near the window, arms crossed tight across her chest, her reflection pale against the glass. "It looks like I was planted," she said quietly. "You weren't," Adrian said firmly, "but it looks like I was, and in this world that's all it takes." Adrian stepped toward her. "Then we tell the truth, all of it." Grace turned. "You want to go public?" "Yes." Her voice dropped. "That means letting them into everything, the cameras, the scrutiny. The judgment, I know. And your board, your mother, they already doubt me. But if I let this narrative live, they'll destroy you to get to me. I won't let that happen." She looked up at him, fully, and saw it, not the man from the tabloids, not the CEO, just a man trying to do the right thing politics for once, without hiding behind power. And something inside her steadied. "All right," she said. "Then we do it together." That afternoon, Adrian drafted a public statement, simple, direct, human. Lyle suggested a PR firm. Adrian refused. "If I don't speak for myself now, I never will." Grace read the statement twice before nodding. Then she sent a message to someone she hadn't spoken to in 2 years. "Janelle, do you still have that blog? I think it's time I told my side." The post went live at 6:12 p.m. Adrian's statement hit the company's official feed seconds later. The backlash came hard, for a while. Then something strange happened. People began to comment differently. Some defended Grace's writing, her blog post about dignity, about being underestimated, about not being a social climber, but a woman just trying to live with truth in a world addicted to spectacle. Others shared their own stories of being used, of being disbelieved, of refusing to be erased. And slowly, the tide began to turn. But far away from the positive comments and warm words, Vivian sat alone in a private room at the Locke estate. She scrolled, quiet, calm, until the screen froze. She turned the tablet off and set it down, then reached into her bag, pulled out an old letter, one that had never been mailed, addressed in elegant handwriting. To Grace Bennett, the Blackwell Foundation. She stared at it, then whispered, "Well, maybe it's time his mother finished what I started." The car that came for Grace wasn't black and sleek like Adrian's. It was deep navy, older, with tinted windows and a uniformed driver who didn't speak. The note had been simple. "Miss Bennett, Margaret Blackwell would like a word. Monsieur Blackwell." No address, no RSVP. But Grace knew where it would be. She almost didn't go, but something told her, if I don't face her, she'll write the ending for me. So she went, not in silk, not in heels. She wore a charcoal sweater, soft black slacks, and her mother's necklace, now fully visible, resting just above her collarbone, not as decoration, as armor. The estate was silent, not grand in a fairy tale way, grand in the way old money prefers. Stone walls, long hallways, cold floors, and echoes where affection should have lived. She was ushered to a parlor with gold drapes and stiff furniture. Margaret Blackwell sat beside the fireplace in a cream blouse and a pale gray skirt, posture impossibly straight, as if she'd been sculpted into that chair. Her eyes didn't flicker when Grace entered. They measured. "Miss Bennett," she said, voice smooth as porcelain. "Thank you for coming." Grace nodded. "You didn't leave much room not to." Margaret gestured to the seat across from her. "Would you like tea?" "Sure." She poured 2 cups, perfectly, silently, then placed the china on the low table between them. "No sugar," she said. "You look like someone who takes things as they are." Grace smiled, just a little. "I do now." They sipped, 1 moment, 2. Then Margaret said it. I won't insult your intelligence by pretending I didn't orchestrate some of this. I've protected this family and this company for over 40 years, and I've learned that silence is a more powerful tool than slander. Grace nodded once. So, that leak? I didn't release it, Margaret said calmly, but I let it spread. Grace studied her. You let your son be humiliated. I let him be tested. And me? Margaret tilted her head. You were never meant to last, Miss Bennet. I assumed you'd fold, perhaps even take the offer Vivian made you, but you didn't. That surprised me. Grace set her teacup down. What exactly do you want from me? Margaret leaned forward, not aggressively, almost gently, but the coldness in her gaze froze the space between them. I want you to walk away with your dignity intact, quietly, without scandal. I can ensure a comfortable future, work, privacy, independence, no headlines. Grace inhaled slowly. And why? She asked. Would I agree to that? Margaret's smile was thin. Because you don't belong in this house, in this world. And sooner or later, it will remind you. The words didn't sting, they should have. But Grace had already burned through humiliation weeks ago. What was left now wasn't anger, it was clarity. She stood slowly. I used to think you were the villain, she said. Now I see you're something worse. Margaret's eyebrow lifted. You're afraid. Of what, dear? Grace took one step closer. Of someone like me not being afraid of you. She touched her necklace. My mother gave this to me when my father left us. We had nothing, no name, no legacy. Just a rented apartment and a woman who worked 2 jobs and still made room for kindness. She held Margaret's gaze. She told me, don't let anyone call you small just because they have louder wallpaper. Margaret blinked, slowly. Grace smiled. I may not belong in your house, but I belong wherever truth is respected. And your son, whether you like it or not, respects mine. She turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. If you really loved him, she added, you'd be proud of the man he's trying to become. Adrian wasn't expecting her. He opened the door with his shirt half-buttoned and his sleeves rolled up, brows drawn in concern. I thought you were home. I went to see her. He stepped aside instinctively, letting her in. She invited you? She summoned me, Grace said, sinking into the couch, but she did it with porcelain and tea, so I guess that makes it polite. What did she say? She offered me peace and distance, then told me I didn't belong. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. I'm sorry. Don't be. She looked up at him. She wanted me to doubt myself, but all she did was confirm how afraid people are of women like me. He crossed the room and sat beside her. Women like you? The kind who don't need their approval to have value. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached over and took her hand, gently. Like she might still pull away. She didn't. I want this to be real, he said softly. Not convenient, not strategic, just real. Grace didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for the small velvet box on the side table, the one he'd used for cufflinks since college. She opened it. Inside, folded in quarters, was the thank you napkin from the gala, still saved, still creased. She held it up. This, she said, was the first moment I thought you saw me. I did. I still need time. I'll give you all of it. They sat like that, hands linked, no performance, no script, while the firelight shifted softly against the walls. And far from the Blackwell estate, Margaret stared out her tall window, a brandy untouched in her hand, as Vivian's voice echoed over the phone. She didn't break. She won't, Margaret replied. Then what now? Margaret's voice was soft, measured. We stop playing chess, and we start playing cards. The Blackwell boardroom had never felt warmer. Not in temperature, in tension. 12 men and women dressed in shades of power, pressed suits, sharp watches, tighter smiles. They sat around the long marble table like they were waiting for blood. Grace sat beside Adrian. No one offered her coffee, but she brought her own from the staff kitchen downstairs. That morning she'd arrived alone, early, and made a full pot. Poured it into a chipped mug, 1 sugar, no cream. Just like every day before her world had changed. She wasn't here to prove she belonged. She was here to remind them. She never needed their permission. Adrian reached for her hand under the table. She let him, but her eyes stayed forward, focused, calm. Margaret Blackwell walked in precisely at 9 a.m., as if the room had been waiting for her. She wore steel gray, the kind of color that dared anyone to challenge her. The meeting began. They opened with the leak, the headlines, the scandal, Words like impropriety, manipulation, and reputational risk flew across the room like well-polished daggers. Then Margaret cleared her throat. "The board has the right to call for a vote," she said, "to evaluate Adrian's current state of leadership and whether recent choices have demonstrated a lack of impartial judgment." Adrian didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He simply said, "If there's a vote, let's take it." Murmurs. Margaret raised her hand. "Before that, I believe Miss Bennet requested a moment to speak." Every head turned. Grace stood slowly. She wasn't in designer heels. She wore soft leather flats and a fitted navy dress she'd bought 2 years ago on clearance. She looked like herself, and that was the most powerful thing in the room. She stepped forward. No paper, no speech, just her. "I've been talked about a lot lately," she began, "so I figured I'd let you hear my voice directly, instead of through lawyers or headlines." Silence. She met their eyes, one by one. "I wasn't hired to love Adrian Blackwell, and he didn't ask me to. We made an agreement, one that started as strategy, but what grew from it was something neither of us expected." She paused. "If you're afraid that means he's no longer impartial, I understand. You've spent your lives protecting what you've built. But let me tell you what I've spent my life doing." She touched her necklace. "My mother was a nurse. She raised me alone. She gave me this the day I almost dropped out of college, said it would remind me who I was, and that no one could take that from me unless I let them." She unclasped it, held it in her palm, then placed it gently on the table. "I'm not giving this up. I'm placing it here. So you all understand something." She looked straight at Margaret. "I'm not walking away because I feel small. I'm walking away because I am not for sale, not as an assistant, not as a distraction, and not as proof of someone else's weakness." She stepped back. "I care about Adrian deeply, but I also care about myself, and I will not let your world shrink who I am." She turned to Adrian. "I hope you find what you're looking for, but I have to go find myself again." He stood halfway, eyes wide. "Grace." She shook her head softly. "No grand speeches. If what we have is real, it won't need one." And just like that, she walked out. No stumble, no tears, no apology, just the steady rhythm of her footsteps echoing through the marble floor, and the scent of coffee, hers, not theirs, still hanging in the air. She spent the next 2 days offline. No news, no emails, no commentary. She visited her mother's grave. She didn't bring the necklace. It had been left on that marble table. She sat beneath the same tree with a sandwich and a book she never opened, and spoke to her mother in silence. Then, on a rainy Tuesday morning, her buzzer rang. She didn't move at first, but something in her chest whispered, "Open the door." He stood there, soaked through, no umbrella, breathing like he'd run 6 blocks. She opened the door and stared at him. "You're early," she said. "For what?" "For whatever this is." Adrian held up something in a small, clear box. The necklace, cleaned, repaired, glinting like it had something to say. "You left it," he said. "I know." I couldn't let it stay on that table. I didn't leave it for them, she said. I left it to end the conversation. He nodded. I thought about what you said, about needing to stand beside you, not in front of you. And I realized I've spent my whole life protecting the Blackwell name, but I never once protected something that wasn't mine to control. He stepped closer. I don't want to lead a company no one can believe in, and I don't want to be a man who asks you to shrink. She blinked. Once. Did they vote? He nodded. Unanimous? You lost? I stepped down. They invoked my father's clause, the one meant to protect the company from me. I stepped down before they could turn it into a spectacle. This way, I kept what mattered, the work, and my integrity. She stared. But the company is still mine. I just won't run it from the top floor anymore. She laughed, almost shocked. And your mother? She's furious. Vivian. Vanished. Grace looked down at the necklace. Why bring this back? He stepped forward. Because this time, he did have a speech. I used to think I needed someone who could fit into this world. Then I realized I need someone who makes me want to build a better one. She looked up at him, tears catching in her lashes. I don't need a crown, she whispered. I just need to know I was chosen. For me. You were. She took the box, clasped the necklace herself, and finally kissed him. No cameras, no strategy, just love. Earned. Quiet. Real. 3 months later, the coffee shop on the corner of 7th and Delmar buzzed with its usual energy. Grace wiped the counter, poured a cappuccino, smiled at a regular who tipped in poetry quotes. She didn't work for Blackwell anymore. She ran her own consulting company now. Small, quiet, smart. And every Friday, she still made coffee at this shop for free, just to remind herself where she came from. The bell above the door rang. Adrian walked in, tie loose, shirt sleeves rolled. He kissed her temple and said, "Got 5 minutes?" She slid him a fresh mug and said, "For you, maybe 10. They sat in the window. 2 people, no audience, no pretending. Just a love that didn't ask to be proven, because it had already survived everything. And chosen each other anyway. The end, now it's your turn. What would you have done in Grace's place? Would you have walked out of that boardroom? Would you have forgiven Adrian? Let me know in the comments, and rate this story from 0 to 10. If you loved this journey, don't forget to like. Subscribe and share it with someone who still believes in real love. See you in the next story.